Imagine a tech CEO, someone running a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, going to an actual physical concrete prison for 2 years.
Right. And not for, embezzlement or insider trading or something like that.
Exactly. Not for standard corporate crime. But because an algorithmic model, their company built secretly discriminated against women applying for a loan,
Yeah.
and they just failed to exercise due diligence to stop it.
I mean, that honestly sounds like a pitch for some dystopian sci-fi movie.
It really does. But I am actually holding a 70-page legal document that is actively trying to make that exact scenario a legal reality. Today, the rule of law is finally coming for the algorithm.
It really is. I mean, hi, everyone. Glad to be here. And yeah, it represents a definitive end to that whole era of, well, move fast and break things.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone.
Yeah.
And yeah, for the last decade, we've basically lived in this regulatory vacuum, right?
Oh, absolutely. Tech companies have largely just relied on voluntary guidelines, internal corporate ethics boards and self-policing to manage artificial intelligence.
Which is basically asking them to grade their own homework.
Exactly. But what you're holding there, that is the transition from please do the right thing to you are legally required to do the right thing.
Yeah. And if you fail, the state will literally dismantle your operations and prosecute your leadership.
Right. It's a massive pivot point.
So let's get into the text. I have the physical document right here. It's the Kenya Gazette Supplement number 15, Senate Bills number 4, dated February 19th, 2026.
And sponsored by Senator Nyamu, right?
Correct. The title on the front is the Artificial Intelligence Bill 2026. So our mission for this deep dive is to basically tear this document apart line by line.
Because we really need to understand the exact mechanisms here, the specific compliance rules and those severe penalties you mentioned.
Yeah, we want to see how a sovereign government is actively attempting to put a legal cage around the most disruptive technology of our generation.
And, the implications of this extend far beyond just a single jurisdiction. This is a blueprint.
Right, so whether you are listening to this as a software developer who's actively building these systems, or maybe a business owner deciding whether to use them,
or even just, an everyday citizen scrolling past AI-generated images online, you really need to care about this.
because this legislative blueprint reveals exactly how your rights and your responsibilities are about to fundamentally change. It's basically a window into the future of digital governance.
It really is. So where do we start? Part 1.
Yeah, part 1, the preliminary section. Because before a government can hand out fines or dispatch inspectors to server farms, they have to legally define what they're actually regulating, right?
Right, and historically, defining artificial intelligence in a courtroom has been just notoriously difficult.
I can imagine. I mean, the tech moves so fast.
Exactly. The technology evolves so rapidly that static legal definitions are usually obsolete before the ink even dries on the paper.
So how do the lawmakers attempt to capture AI in ink here without accidentally, regulating everyday software?
Well, that's the foundational trap of technology law, right?
Sure.
If you draft the definition too narrowly, a startup in a garage will just invent a novel architecture by next Tuesday that technically bypasses the statute.
But if you draft it too broadly,
Then you accidentally criminalize basic spreadsheet functions or like the deterministic code that runs your microwave oven.
right, so the drafters had to find a very specific legal tripwire. Let's look at Section 2 of the bill. It defines artificial intelligence as a machine-based system, leveraging machine learning, data processing, or algorithms to operate with varying levels of autonomy.
Okay, standard so far.
But then there's this phrase that carries all the legal weight. It says the system infers outputs like predictions, content, or decisions from inputs.
Yes, that word is everything. Infers.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if I type a really complex formula into Microsoft Excel, it processes the input and gives me an output. Why doesn't this law classify Excel as an AI system?
So the distinction lies in deterministic versus probabilistic computing.
Okay, break that down for me.
Traditional software, like your Excel formula, is purely deterministic. It operates on explicit, rigid instructions programmed by a human engineer.
Right, so if input X occurs, execute path Y.
Exactly. It doesn't infer anything. It just calculates based on an unyielding logical path.
Okay, so how is the AI definition different?
The definition in this bill targets systems that learn patterns from vast data sets and build their own probabilistic state spaces. An AI isn't following a static rulebook.
It's making guesses.
Well, educated guesses. When prompted, it evaluates the statistical likelihood of various outcomes based on its training and makes a choice. It infers.
Wow. So that single word, inferring, is what separates a standard line of code from a neural network in the eyes of the law.
Precisely. It's a very elegant legal solution to a highly complex technical problem.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, taking that a step further, the bill specifically carves out generative artificial intelligence as a subcategory.
Right. Systems capable of generating text, images, audio, or video based on learned patterns.
But then, almost immediately in the text, it creates a completely separate legal definition for synthetic media.
Yes, and that distinction is crucial.
It defines synthetic media as media content manipulated or generated using generative AI that depicts events, speech, or appearances that did not occur.
Events that did not actually happen.
Right. But wait, why split those definitions? Generative AI makes the synthetic media. Aren't they basically the same thing?
Well, they're the tool and the output. And legally speaking, you must regulate them differently.
Okay, how so?
So generative AI is the underlying architecture, right? The large language model or the diffusion model. It has completely legitimate transformative uses in education, coding, art.
Sure, writing emails, brainstorming.
Exactly. But synthetic media is the specific, highly weaponizable output of that tool.
Oh, I see. You mean deepfakes.
Precisely. I mean, imagine waking up tomorrow and seeing a perfectly rendered 4K video of a local governor accepting a cash bribe on social media.
They would go viral instantly.
Right. And it takes 24 hours for forensic experts to prove the video is a hallucination. But the actual election is in 12 hours.
Oh, wow. So the damage is just instantaneous and irreversible.
Yes. So by clearly defining synthetic media in Part 1 as media depicting events that did not occur, the drafters are essentially loading a legal weapon.
Setting up the vocabulary they'll need later.
Exactly. They are establishing the exact legal vocabulary they will need later in the bill to prosecute digital impersonation and political misinformation without outlawing the generative algorithms entirely.
That is really clever, actually. Okay, so if the law now recognizes what the tech is, the next logical question is, who is legally responsible when something goes horribly wrong?
Liability,
Yeah.
the hardest part of tech law.
Right. The bill makes a very hard distinction between a provider and a deployer.
Yes, those are the two key legal personas.
So the text says the provider is the entity that develops the AI and places it on the market, but the deployer is the entity that puts the AI into service or uses it under their authority in a professional capacity.
And you have to notice that this explicitly excludes everyday end users acting in a personal capacity.
Oh, okay. So if I'm just messing around with a chat bot on my phone to plan a vacation itinerary to the coast.
You carry zero legal burden under this framework. You are just a consumer.
Good to know. But what if I'm a business owner?
Right. If you are a logistics company and you integrate that exact same AI into your fleet management system to route your trucks, you become the deployer.
And a massive set of obligations suddenly falls onto my shoulders.
Exactly.
Okay, let's ground this with an analogy, because I feel like the software supply chain is notoriously murky.
It's very opaque, yes.
Let's forget software for a second. Let's look at the nuclear energy industry.
Oh, I like this.
So the provider would be the massive engineering firm that designs and builds a state-of-the-art nuclear reactor.
Right. They construct the control rods, they program the safety limits, they test the physics of the core.
Yes. And then the deployer is the local municipal utility company that buys that specific reactor, installs it in their city, and actively runs it to generate power for paying citizens.
Yes, that maps perfectly.
So if that reactor melts down, who is at fault? Is it the engineers who built it in a lab or the technicians who operate it in the real world?
Well, that analogy captures the exact tension this law is trying to resolve. Because in a nuclear meltdown, the liability depends entirely on the point of failure.
Right.
The engineering firm, the provider, they have an absolute legal obligation to ensure the reactor's core design is structurally sound, rigorously tested, and delivered with exhaustive operational limitations.
They have to say, here's what this machine can and cannot do safely.
Exactly. But the utility company, the deployer, they have the obligation to operate it within those specified parameters. They have to perform daily maintenance, ensure the cooling systems are functioning, things like that.
So bringing it back to the realm of AI, the company training the massive foundational model in a Silicon Valley server farm, they are the provider. But the regional bank in Nairobi, using that exact model to evaluate local mortgage applications, they are the deployer.
Precisely. And historically, when an algorithmic system caused harm, say, it systematically denied mortgages to a specific demographic, the provider and the deployer would just point fingers at each other in court.
Right. The bank would just say, hey, the algorithm was racially biased when we bought it from the tech giant.
And the tech company would counter with, well, the bank misused our general purpose tool for a high-risk financial application without fine-tuning it for their local market.
The legal stalemate.
It was. But this bill surgically separates those responsibilities. It ensures there is no legal void where accountability just vanishes into the cloud.
Wow. Okay, so with the definitions locked down and the liability clearly assigned, we have to move to enforcement.
Right, because laws need police.
Because if we finally have a legal tripwire that separates Microsoft Excel from a neural network, who is actually going to enforce it?
And that's where we transition away from tech executives writing open letters about AI safety and move toward the creation of a brand new, highly empowered authority figure.
Yes, Part 2 of the bill. It establishes the Office of the Artificial Intelligence Commissioner.
This elevates the theoretical legal framework into a tangible, actual bureaucratic reality.
It's a real office with real power.
Exactly. The bill doesn't just create some advisory desk tucked away in the basement of the existing ICT ministry. It establishes the Office of the Commissioner as an independent state office.
The text says it's a body corporate.
Right, meaning it exists as its own legal entity. It's capable of suing and being sued. It has its own budget, its own staff, its own explicit mandate.
The hiring process outlined for the commissioner is super rigorous, actually. The Public Service Commission initiates it, shortlists candidates, holds open interviews, and nominates 3 people.
And then the president appoints one, subject to the approval of Parliament.
Right. But I want to spend some time on Section 6, the required qualifications for this individual. Because when I read this resume requirement, I frankly thought it was completely absurd.
Oh, the statutory requirements for the role are incredibly demanding, which is a massive departure from traditional political appointments.
Okay, listen to this. They want a master's degree in AI, computer science, law, ethics, or a related field.
High bar, but reasonable.
Sure. But then the candidate must have at least 10 years of experience in a relevant field like AI governance, human rights, or risk management.
Okay, so a decade of deep policy work.
And this is the kicker, at least 10 years of experience in the management of public or private institutions.
Yes.
I mean, they aren't looking for a bureaucrat. They are demanding a digital superhero.
Right.
They want a Silicon Valley tech executive, a human rights lawyer, and a senior public administrator, all merged into one single person.
It sounds impossible, I know. But what's fascinating here is that we are witnessing the legal codification of technocracy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, look at the historical context. Over the past decade, we have watched endless congressional and parliamentary hearings around the world where career politicians attempt to question tech CEOs.
Oh, those are usually painful to watch.
They are. The lawmakers frequently ask fundamentally flawed questions because they just do not understand the underlying architecture of the internet, let alone machine learning.
Right. They ask how a free app makes money, or they confuse a search engine with a social media network. The knowledge gap between the regulator and the regulated is basically a canyon.
Exactly. And this bill looks at that knowledge gap and essentially makes it illegal.
Wow.
You cannot regulate a black box algorithmic model if you do not understand the complex mathematics of how it weighs variables.
That makes sense.
And you cannot adjudicate a claim of algorithmic bias if you don't possess a deep background in civil liberties and human rights law. And frankly, you cannot stand up a massive new regulatory agency without a decade of executive management experience.
So the days of handing a technology portfolio to a political ally who just figures it out on the fly are totally over.
The stakes are simply too high for amateur governance now.
And the power granted to this unicorn commissioner is staggering. Let's look at Section 11. It empowers them to issue enforcement notices, impose administrative fines, and summon persons to give evidence.
Standard regulatory powers.
But Section 11, subsection E, is the clause that genuinely changes the paradigm. The commissioner has the power to, and I'm quoting here, enter premises to inspect artificial intelligence systems, records, or data upon reasonable notice.
Yes, we are talking about physical, geographical entry into a tech company's facilities.
Which is wild, because the general public often thinks of AI and the cloud in general as this ethereal, invisible magic floating in the atmosphere.
Right, the cloud sounds weightless.
But the cloud is incredibly physical. It is just millions of blinking servers sitting in massive, hyper-cooled concrete warehouses.
Exactly. By granting the power of physical entry, the law forcefully reminds tech companies that their digital products exist within sovereign geographic borders.
It totally pierces the abstraction of the internet. A tech firm can't just send the commissioner a polished, self-authored PDF report claiming their new model is totally safe.
No, they cannot.
Section 11 means agents of the state can actually show up at the server farm, walk past security, plug into the mainframe, and demand to see the raw training data.
Right. And because they're going to be looking at highly proprietary algorithms, trade secrets, and the intellectual crown jewels of these massive corporations.
Yeah, how do they keep that safe?
The bill provides the commissioner and their staff with protection from personal liability for acts done in good faith, alongside strict confidentiality bounds.
Oh, I see.
The legal architecture has to protect both the regulator's independence and the private company's intellectual property, because if the state is going to look under the digital hood, they absolutely cannot leak the schematics.
That makes total sense. But even a commissioner with a flawless technocratic resume cannot foresee every ripple effect of AI across a nation's entire economy.
No, one person can't do it all.
Right. And the drafters recognize this limitation, which brings us to Part 3 of the bill, the Advisory Committee on Artificial Intelligence.
Yes, the commissioner doesn't rule in isolation. They are surrounded by a legally mandated brain trust.
Because centralized power in technology regulation is dangerous, right?
Sure.
Since AI is a general-purpose technology.
Exactly. It doesn't just impact software development. It impacts medicine, agriculture, finance, and education simultaneously. No single mind can monitor all those vectors.
So let's look at the composition of this committee, which is laid out in Section 17. It forces a collision of incredibly different worldviews.
It really does.
So it's chaired by the commissioner. But sitting at the exact same table, you have a representative from the private tech sector, someone from civil society and human rights organizations, 2 AI ethics experts, a representative of the Data Protection Commissioner,
And explicitly, 2 nominees from the Council of Governors, 1 man and 1 woman.
Yeah, when I look at that seating arrangement, I don't see collaboration. I see total agonizing gridlock.
You're not wrong.
I mean, how do a profit-driven tech CEO and a civil liberties activist agree on a unified national policy?
Well, the gridlock is actually a feature, not a bug.
Really?
Yes. Historically, the tech sector has operated in a profound echo chamber. Software engineers talk to other software engineers, investors talk to other investors.
Right, the culture is very insular.
The dominant question has always been, is it computationally possible to build this thing? And rarely, what happens to society if we actually deploy this thing?
So this committee engineers friction by design.
Exactly. So when the tech sector representative argues that deploying untargeted facial recognition will massively increase the efficiency of retail banking,
The human rights representative is legally mandated to be right there in the room to argue that the training data is racially biased and violates privacy.
precisely. And the commissioner sits at the head of the table to synthesize that friction into balanced national policy.
That is fascinating. But the most insightful inclusion in this entire committee structure, to me, is the Council of Governors.
Yes, that stood out to me as well.
Why are local, county-level political figures sitting on a bleeding-edge national AI advisory board?
Because of the realities of devolved government and the actual physical deployment of AI.
Explain that.
Technology policy is usually debated in massive urban tech hubs. But if an AI system is deployed to analyze satellite imagery and dictate irrigation schedules, that doesn't really impact the capital city.
Right, it impacts the rural agricultural counties.
Exactly. If an AI is used to triage patients, it impacts the local county healthcare clinics.
I see.
The local governors are placed on this committee to ensure that high-level, abstract tech policies do not accidentally devastate decentralized rural populations.
The local leaders act as the canary in the coal mine for the macroeconomic impacts.
Yes, and the law explicitly tasks this committee, in Section 18, to advise on strategies for workforce reskilling in response to AI-induced job changes.
Right, so they are preparing for massive labor shifts at the ground level. We will definitely explore the workforce impact heavily later, but it's clear this committee is built to function as an early warning radar for the whole country.
Exactly, and they are required to meet at least 4 times a financial year. It is an active, operational engine of governance, not just a ceremonial board that rubber stamps decisions.
Okay, so we've established the definitions, the liability, the commissioner, and the advisory board. But how do they actually apply the rules?
That's the big question.
Because the most fundamental truth about AI is that not all models are created equal. You cannot regulate a chatbot that writes marketing emails with the same heavy hand you use to regulate an AI that diagnoses oncology scans.
No, that would instantly crush a nation's entire tech sector.
Right. Which brings us to Part V, the governance of artificial intelligence. Specifically, Section 25, which outlines a rigorous risk classification system.
This is truly the operational core of the legislation. The bill utilizes a modular, tiered approach based entirely on the risk a system poses.
Risk to health, safety, fundamental rights, the environment, or societal welfare, right?
Exactly.
So the text divides AI systems into 4 distinct tiers. Let's walk through them, but instead of simplistic software analogies, let's look at this through the lens of the aviation industry.
I love that analogy. Let's do it.
Okay, so at the very bottom, we have minimal risk systems. These present negligible risks to society. In aviation, this is the equivalent of the in-flight entertainment system.
Right. If the movie screen crashes, it's annoying, but no one is in actual danger.
Exactly. In the AI context, this is a basic spam filter or an algorithm organizing your personal photo album. The government essentially leaves this tier alone.
Minimal oversight required.
Then, next tier up is limited risk. These systems carry moderate risks, usually related to transparency. In an airplane, this is the autopilot system that holds the plane's altitude during cruising.
It requires oversight, and the pilots definitely need to know when it is actively engaged.
Yes. In AI, this represents customer service chatbots. The primary legal obligation here is transparency. You must clearly inform the user that they are interacting with a machine, not a human.
Right, no deception.
Then we enter the critical zone. High risk. These are systems used in vital sectors. Healthcare, education, agriculture, finance, security, employment, and public administration.
This is the automated landing system of a commercial airliner.
Exactly. If this system fails during a heavy storm, hundreds of people die. The regulatory burden here is immense.
As it should be.
And finally, at the very top is unacceptable risk. These systems pose severe existential threats to fundamental rights. They are completely and unequivocally prohibited.
In aviation, this would be an aircraft manufacturer intentionally designing a hidden backdoor that allows a third party to hijack the flight controls midair.
Yes, it is illegal to build, deploy, or possess. In the AI realm, this covers systems that subliminally manipulate human behavior to cause physical or psychological harm.
Or untargeted, mass biometric surveillance in public spaces. Prohibited entirely.
The aviation framework perfectly illustrates the stakes here. It provides developers with the freedom to innovate rapidly in the minimal risk tiers while building massive legal fortresses around the high-risk applications.
But I want to drill down into what the drafters explicitly placed in that high-risk category, because it's telling.
Okay, what stood out to you?
Well, healthcare and finance are universally recognized as high risk globally, but this bill specifically highlights employment and agriculture.
The inclusion of agriculture immediately caught my attention, too. In many Western tech regulations, agriculture is barely an afterthought. Why elevate it to the exact same risk tier as medical diagnostics?
Because context is everything in statutory law. In a nation like Kenya, agriculture is not merely an economic sector.
Right.
It is the absolute bedrock of national survival, food security, and rural stability.
That makes sense.
If a tech company deploys an AI system to dictate national crop cycles, predict weather patterns, or automate the distribution of agricultural loans, and that AI hallucinates or operates on fundamentally flawed data.
The result isn't just a dip in quarterly profits.
No. The result is actual famine.
The blast radius of a failure is catastrophic.
Exactly. The downstream macroeconomic effects of crop failure dictated by an algorithm would devastate the country. Therefore, any AI touching agriculture is classified as high risk.
Wow. And the same logic applies to employment, right?
Yes. If a massive corporation implements an AI algorithm to scan thousands of resumes and autonomously decide who gets an interview, and that algorithm secretly learned to downgrade applicants based on gender, tribal affiliation, or geographic region.
It is systematically denying citizens their livelihood at scale.
Precisely. By classifying employment AI as high risk, the law demands rigorous accountability and testing before the damage is done to the labor market.
Which leads directly to the next question. If I am an engineering firm and I am building one of these high-risk AI systems, what exactly does this law force me to do?
Let's look at Section 26, Obligations for High-Risk Artificial Intelligence Systems.
And the compliance burden outlined here is just staggering.
It is intentionally heavy. As we said, if you want the financial reward of operating the automated landing system, you must bear the cost of the rigorous safety inspections.
Okay, so the section dictates that providers and deployers must conduct exhaustive risk assessments and human rights impact assessments prior to deployment.
Yes, before it goes live.
They must guarantee transparency, traceability, and the explainability of the AI's decision-making process. But Section 26, subsection 1D, is the mandate that will keep tech executives awake at night.
The data retention rule.
It legally requires them to maintain records of data inputs, training data sets, outputs, and performance metrics for at least 5 years.
This is where abstract legal theory collides violently with physical computing limitations.
Yeah, we really need to explain the sheer scale of what is being asked here. Because keeping every single input, every massive training data set, and every generated output for 5 years is almost unfathomable.
It is.
A modern large language model is trained on petabytes of data, essentially scraping the entire public internet.
Right.
If a high-risk system processes millions of queries a day across a banking network, storing the logs, the weights, and the training data for half a decade will result in astronomical cloud computing costs.
It is an immense operational and financial burden. There's no getting around that.
So, my pushback to the drafters is this. Will this well-intentioned transparency rule inadvertently entrench the very monopolies they are actually trying to regulate?
That is the big fear, yes.
Because are we creating a regulatory environment so expensive that a brilliant college student in Nairobi can never launch an AI startup, leaving the field entirely to trillion-dollar multinational tech conglomerates who can easily afford the server space?
That is the most profound tension in global AI regulation today. The friction between demanding absolute transparency and maintaining commercial feasibility for startups.
It seems impossible to balance.
You are entirely correct that the storage costs will be a massive barrier to entry. But let's examine the legal philosophy behind why the law demands it in the first place.
Okay.
It comes back to the concept of explainability. Let's say a high-risk AI system denies a small business owner a commercial loan today.
Right.
3 years from now, that business owner files a lawsuit claiming the AI utilized proxy data to racially discriminate against them.
Okay, they go to court.
If the bank didn't keep the original training data, the specific weights of the model at that exact time, and the specific inputs from her application, how can a judge ever adjudicate the truth?
Because the algorithm evolves, the parameters shift constantly.
Exactly. The law is forcing the deployer to keep the receipts. If a corporation is going to wield the power to autonomously deny a citizen a loan, they must bear the financial cost of mathematically proving why they did it, even years later during legal discovery.
So the burden of proof permanently remains on the entity deploying the power.
Yes.
I understand the legal logic, but the barrier to entry still remains terrifying for innovators. How does a local startup survive this environment?
That exact concern is why the lawmakers included Section 29, regulatory sandboxes. This is the pressure relief valve built directly into the legislation.
Okay, what exactly is a regulatory sandbox in a legal context?
It is a concept borrowed from financial technology regulation, actually. The commissioner is legally mandated to establish controlled, ring-fenced environments for testing AI under direct regulatory oversight.
So if you are that brilliant college student with a novel, high-risk AI architecture for optimizing agricultural supply chains,
You do not have to immediately comply with the crushing 5-year data retention rules and the massive human rights impact assessments on day one.
oh nice. Instead, you apply to enter the regulatory sandbox.
Exactly.
So inside the sandbox, the rules are just suspended.
Not suspended, no, but highly modified and subsidized. You operate within a strict boundary, using limited, safe data sets under the direct, watchful eye of the commissioner's office.
Okay, so it's a testing list.
Right. The regulators observe how your AI behaves in the real world, you learn what full compliance will eventually require, and the broader society gets the benefit of your innovation without the systemic risk of an unmonitored launch.
And the bill specifically notes that priority for sandbox entry will be given to innovations that address national priorities.
Yes. It creates a safe harbor for local startups to mature before they are thrown into the deep end of high-risk compliance.
That significantly softens the blow. It balances the heavy punitive hand of the law with a nurturing environment for domestic innovation.
It's a very pragmatic compromise.
But let's shift our focus from the data storage and the startup ecosystems to the actual people.
The human element.
All right, we move to Part V sections on ethics, jobs, and oversight. Because beyond the technical requirements, how does this bill protect the flesh and blood human beings whose lives and livelihoods are being radically altered by algorithmic decision-making.
This is where the bill really transcends technical specifications and enters the realm of profound socioeconomic policy. Let's look at Section 30, the ethical guidelines.
Okay.
It addresses bias prevention and privacy, which, are standard in global tech regulation, but it uniquely mandates guidelines on environmental sustainability.
Yes. It explicitly demands assessments of energy consumption and the carbon footprint of AI systems.
Exactly.
I found that inclusion absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Because the tech industry has done a brilliant marketing job convincing the public that AI is green, weightless magic.
Oh, they definitely have.
But generating a single high-definition AI image can consume the same amount of electricity as charging a smartphone to 100%. Training a foundational model requires millions of gallons of fresh water to cool the server racks.
It's a massive physical footprint.
By embedding environmental sustainability directly into the statute, the law treats AI as a physical, heavy industry actor, no different than a steel mill or a chemical plant.
And if you take that to its logical conclusion, it demonstrates incredible foresight regarding sovereign resources.
How so?
The global energy grid is already showing signs of severe strain under the exponential growth of AI data centers. The government is preemptively stating, if you want to deploy massive, computationally intensive models within our borders, you have to mathematically account for the drain on our national power grid and water supply.
That is huge. But the protection of the physical world extends directly to the human being in Section 32, the Human-Centric Artificial Intelligence Mandate.
Yes, Section 32.
It states that an AI system must be designed to enhance rather than replace human capabilities. And crucially, it legally requires human oversight in critical decisions.
Meaning a qualified person must possess the ability to intervene, interrupt, or override the system's outputs.
Right. The human override is a non-negotiable legal safeguard here.
Think back to the high-risk medical diagnostic example we talked about.
Okay, an AI scans an MRI and autonomously determines a patient has an inoperable tumor.
The law demands that a human doctor, a qualified person, has the technical ability and the legal authority to review that scan, intervene, and completely override the AI's diagnosis to prescribe treatment.
So the machine is never legally permitted to have the final, unchallengeable word on a human's fate.
Never.
The law is basically forcing the human to keep their hands firmly on the steering wheel, even if the autopilot is engaged.
That's a great way to put it. Co-pilot, not autopilot.
But the protection of the human doesn't stop at physical safety. It extends into macroeconomics. Section 33 absolutely astounded me when I read it.
Ah, yes, the workforce impact section.
It dictates that if a provider or deployer introduces an AI system that is likely to impact employment, they must conduct a workforce impact assessment.
Specifically analyzing potential job displacement.
And they must implement mitigation measures, including paying for reskilling programs in collaboration with the government.
This is a revolutionary approach to the economic theory of technological unemployment.
We really need to unpack the magnitude of this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say a major telecommunications company decides to purchase an advanced AI system that will effectively automate and replace 500 human workers in their customer service call center.
A very realistic scenario right now.
Right. This law says they cannot simply execute mass layoffs to boost their quarterly profit margins.
No, they cannot.
They are legally obligated to assess the exact nature of the job loss and actively participate in and likely fund the retraining of those 500 human workers so they can transition into new roles in the economy.
Yes, that is exactly what it says.
That is wild.
The underlying economic principle here is the internalization of negative externalities.
Explain that for the listener.
For decades, corporations have reaped the massive financial benefits of automation, while society, the taxpayer, and the government were forced to absorb the collateral costs of unemployment, welfare, and social instability.
The company gets the profit, the state gets the bill.
Exactly. But Section 33 forcefully shifts that economic burden back onto the balance sheet of the corporation.
Wow.
The law is essentially saying to the company, you have the right to deploy the AI and you have the right to innovate, but you do not have the right to abandon the human collateral.
It treats AI-induced job displacement not as a natural disaster, but as a corporate macroeconomic action that requires funded mitigation.
It is incredibly bold legislation. It views the tech company as a participant in the social contract, not just a profit extraction machine.
It really does. But of course, a law without severe consequences is nothing more than a piece of paper with good intentions.
Right. What happens when the rules are broken?
What happens when a CEO decides a reskilling program is just too expensive, or an engineering firm secretly deploys an unacceptable risk behavioral manipulation AI?
We transition to Part 6, General Provisions, which covers crime, punishment, and future-proofing.
This is where the theoretical framework grows actual teeth. Let's look at Section 35, which details the specific offenses and the corresponding penalties.
Okay, walk us through the offenses.
They cover the entire spectrum of what we have discussed today. Deploying a prohibited, unacceptable risk system. Failing to conduct a risk assessment for a high-risk system.
Actively obstructing the commissioner when they execute a warrant to enter your premises.
Yep. Failing to conduct the workforce displacement assessment and generating or distributing non-consensual synthetic media deepfakes that cause harm, misinformation, or defamation.
And the penalties mapped to these offenses are stark.
Very stark. For the severe violations, such as deploying prohibited systems, failing the high-risk safety obligations, or distributing malicious deepfakes, a person is liable upon conviction to a fine of up to 5 million shillings, or up to 2 years imprisonment, or both.
And for the lesser administrative offenses, like, failing the transparency obligations or obstructing the office's paperwork, the penalty is up to 1 million shillings or 6 months in prison.
So there is real physical jail time on the table for writing dangerous code or deploying a harmful algorithm.
There is. But the clause that completely rewrites the rules of engagement for the tech industry is Section 35, subsection 3, corporate liability.
Let me read this verbatim. It reads, where the offense is committed by a body corporate, every director or officer of the body corporate who had knowledge of the commission of the offense and who did not exercise due diligence to ensure compliance with this act shall be guilty of the offense.
That is the single most consequential sentence in the entire bill for business owners.
Why is that?
In legal theory, this is known as piercing the corporate veil.
We need to dive deep into what that means because it sounds incredibly dramatic. What is the corporate veil and why is piercing it so terrifying for executives?
Well, under standard corporate law, a corporation is treated as its own distinct legal person.
Right.
If a company does something negligent or unlawful, the company itself gets sued or fined. The company pays the financial penalty out of its corporate treasury, and the executives, the CEO, the board of directors, they just go home to their mansions.
Their personal bank accounts are untouched.
Exactly. The corporate veil is the legal shield that protects the personal assets and the personal freedom of the individuals from the actions of the corporate entity.
It allows executives to take massive risks because their personal downside is permanently capped.
Exactly. But this clause pierces that shield entirely. It draws a historical parallel to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 in the United States.
Oh, the Enron fallout.
Yes. Following the massive accounting fraud scandals of Enron and WorldCom, where executives claimed they had no idea their companies were committing fraud, the government passed a law forcing CEOs to personally sign off on financial reports.
Right. And if the reports were fraudulent, the CEO went to prison personally.
Yes. And this AI bill is applying that exact same legal weapon to algorithms.
So it dictates that a tech CEO or a board director cannot hide behind the corporate logo.
They cannot.
If the telecommunications company deploys a high-risk AI without the required safeguards, and the director knew about it and failed to exercise due diligence to stop it, that director is personally guilty of the offense.
They personally face the 5 million shilling fine.
They personally face the 2 years in a concrete prison cell.
The psychological shift this creates in a corporate boardroom just cannot be overstated. It fundamentally alters the risk calculus.
How does it change the conversation in the boardroom?
Previously, deploying a slightly unsafe AI early to beat a competitor to market was just a cost-benefit analysis. Will the massive profits from being first exceed the potential corporate fine we might have to pay 3 years from now?
That was just a mathematical business decision for them.
Exactly. But now the director is sitting at the head of the boardroom table, sweating, thinking, am I willing to lose 2 years of my actual life in a physical prison so the company's stock price can bump up next quarter?
It perfectly aligns the personal incentives of the decision makers with the safety of the general public. Nothing ensures rigorous legal compliance quite like the threat of personal incarceration for the executive class. Okay, we have the rigorous rules, we have the technocratic enforcer, and we have the severe personal penalties. But how does this legal architecture survive the relentless test of time?
Right, because the tech doesn't stop.
We know how fast this technology moves. The bill includes a review mechanism, Section 37, stating the act must be reviewed every 3 years to ensure it keeps up with technological advancements in AI.
Yes.
My question is that fast enough? In the AI ecosystem, 3 years is a century. A new world-altering foundational model drops every Tuesday. An architecture that is cutting-edge today is obsolete in 18 months. Is a 3-year legislative review cycle actually agile enough to govern this space?
It's a highly valid concern,
Yep.
honestly. To an engineer in Silicon Valley, a 3-year horizon is an absolute eternity.
Yeah, they'd laugh at that timeline.
They would, but we have to view this in the context of national government, statutory law, and parliamentary procedure.
Which is notoriously slow.
Extremely slow. In that realm, a guaranteed, legally mandated 3-year review cycle is moving at absolute light speed. Most foundational regulatory laws sit on the books for decades, slowly becoming obsolete without ever being touched by lawmakers.
So by legally forcing Parliament to reopen the hood of this law every 36 months.
To consult with the commissioner, analyze the data from the regulatory sandboxes, and assess emerging international best practices.
They are attempting to build a living, agile legal framework.
Yes. It is a profound acknowledgement of humility by the government. They are legally admitting that they do not possess all the answers today, that the technology will definitely surprise them, and that the law must have a built-in mechanism for constant, iterative evolution.
That is actually really refreshing to see in a piece of legislation.
It is.
So let's take a breath and look back at the immense journey we just took through these 70 pages.
This is a lot of ground to cover.
It really is. We started with the sheer philosophical and technical difficulty of defining an algorithm that learns, landing on the legal tripwire of inferring outputs and probabilistic state spaces.
Right, and then we witnessed the creation of the new AI commissioner, a mandated digital technocrat wielding the terrifying power to physically enter server farms and seize records.
We analyzed the deliberate, necessary friction engineered into the advisory committee, watching human rights advocates, tech executives, and local county governors hash out the future of localized AI deployment.
We examined the rigid risk classification system, separating the minimal risk chat functions from the high-risk systems governing agriculture and employment, and explored why a hallucinating crop algorithm poses a national security threat.
We confronted the crushing reality of the data retention obligations, offset by the safe haven of regulatory sandboxes designed to protect domestic startups.
We saw a law that forces technology to remain grounded in the physical world, demanding accountability for carbon footprints and server cooling.
We explored the revolutionary mandate that forces corporations to internalize the macroeconomic cost of algorithmic job displacement.
And finally, we saw the raw teeth of the law, piercing the historical corporate veil to threaten rogue tech directors with actual prison time, while ensuring the legislation itself adapts and evolves every 3 years.
It is a breathtaking, comprehensive attempt to tame the future.
It really is the blueprint for how a society intends to survive and prosper in the algorithmic age.
But as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought, something to mull over as you navigate your day.
Okay.
We talked heavily about Section 32, the human-centric mandate. The law legally requires that a human must be able to intervene and override a critical AI decision.
Right, the co-pilot model.
The human is positioned as the ultimate infallible safeguard. But what happens tomorrow?
What do you mean?
As these AI models rapidly evolve, they're not just getting faster, they're becoming statistically more accurate and less biased than human beings in highly complex fields.
That is statistically true, yes.
An AI can already detect certain microscopic cancers on an oncology scan with a higher degree of accuracy than a panel of senior human doctors. An AI can calculate the structural integrity and shear stress of a bridge design more flawlessly than a human engineer.
So where does the human fit in?
Exactly. So will there come a day, perhaps much sooner than we think, when a human override is actually the more dangerous, riskier option?
Wow.
If the machine is statistically right 99.9% of the time, and the human expert is right 95% of the time, is the legal requirement for a human to keep their hands on the steering wheel actually costing human lives?
That is a terrifying question.
By legally forcing humans to stay in the loop, are we truly safeguarding our collective future? Or are we just clinging to our own fragile egos?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive as we unpack the architecture of tomorrow, one line of ink at a time.